instruction we've received isn't far, but if it were, it would still be our obligation. And so I'm curious, we as a community of Reformed Jews often do not spend all day studying Torah and Talmud. And so sometimes it can feel, even for me as a rabbinical student, that the Torah is a little bit far away. And so I'm curious, all of you are here, so you clearly have a commitment to Jewish life. And I'm wondering what, in your life, going after Jewish life and Jewish teaching and Jewish instruction looks like. Especially if you are not living a fully halachic life, what does it mean for you to keep that instruction close to you and to pursue it regularly? There's no wrong answers here. I truly want to learn more about you and your relationship to Judaism and to Torah.
Since I have the microphone still, but
why not?
I grew up in a modern Orthodox family, and there did come a time where I said, okay, I'm going to go out and eat non-kosher. That lasted about less than a month. But it became, because for me, that became part of the essence of who I was. And it's part of the essence because it means that I have to pay attention to what I'm doing, and it does mark me separate from some other kind of people. So that's part of where my commitment or identity comes from.
Well, I think that part of the commandment is that if God is in our hearts, is for us not to have a stiff heart, as opposed to being stiff-necked, not to have a stiff heart, to always be open to God. And that is what makes us who we are. And the good news is that God is very forgiving. God will always welcome us back into his keeping, something that we Jews believe in. Unfortunately, the religion of wokeness doesn't do that.
I also think this encourages individual practice, and one can be Jewish and observe most commandments, not all, from home. Whereas there are still in Torah and in liberal interpretation certain things that's more traditional to do in a minyan. Whether that's at a home or a synagogue, that's not the issue, but in community. So it supports the idea of community, but our tradition does not require now pilgrimages to the temple in Jerusalem, although certainly if you're Islamic, there's a tradition of the Hajj where you have to go to Mecca, and we don't have that. You don't have to travel to observe our mitzvot.
So you're saying that this verse of Torah maybe laid the groundwork for the element of rabbinic Judaism that allows it to be wherever we are,
Well,
whether like in Galut.
That plus the destruction of the temple.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's also interesting that the pendulum of Reform Judaism swings back and forth, where we are right now here at Temple Emanuel probably closer to conservative than the classical reform, which only did English. And
I mean, they would have been scoffing at us wearing talitot.
So everyone, I guess, is searching for their connection with God, whether it be halakha, more halakha, or less halakha. Although I do have a friend who's a Orthodox cantor who says, you know, eventually if you give this up, you give this up, you give this up, pretty soon we're Unitarian.
Thank you.
One thing I'm thinking about is for those of us who are becoming rabbis, or just, this is a room with a lot of folks who are really engaged a lot of the time with Torah study. And, what I'm noticing here is actually, like, probably for lots of us, it's not enough just to come here every Saturday morning. Like, this is not us, like, reaching. I mean, there's obviously friction in all of our lives. Certainly I know, like, there's friction to getting out to shul on a Saturday morning. But I'm reading this and thinking for the first time, like, how am I pushing myself for more Torah? You know, it's not, it's like it's available, you know, lo bashamayim hi, like I can come to services and get Torah, but that doesn't satisfy if it were far, I would have to push myself for it. So to me, that suggests, you know, come to shul on Saturday morning, but also find teachers, do reading. Like there should be more than just this.
Complacency isn't enough.
I'm not sure that I would call it complacency, but I'd say like push.
Several of us probably have a similar family history of the generation before us being very Jewish, but in kind of open rebellion to observance and, you know, beyond reform, as it were. And that's certainly true in my mother's family. So my act of rebellion was coming back to synagogue. And it's been very satisfying.
I'm so glad to hear that, and we are so grateful that that led you here to our community.
I always read this, perhaps because of who I am and what I do for a living, but for example, last night we had Dr. Kochav El-Kayam Levi come, and she's Israeli, and the first thing she says, I introduce myself, hi, I'm Rabbi Altman, she says, oh, wow, it's so amazing that you're here. I can't believe a woman cantor and a woman rabbi, wow. And so I always read also this, that the Torah is not too far for me personally, right? Like I've made a life out of reading Torah, and part of what it is to be a Reformed Jew, a progressive Jew, a Jew of the 21st century, is that people can have access to Torah and never have before. So I always read that through that lens this year. Or I always read, when we get to this time in the year, I always read it through this lens.
Beautiful. Any other personal stories? Okay, so next we're going to read a story from the Talmud, which is known as the Oven of Achnai. And in true rabbinic fashion, and by rabbi and rabbinic in that sense, I mean the original rabbinic way of thinking, there's a lot of weaving. And so it may not immediately be clear where the story is going, but I invite you to stick with it and engage with it through the lens of curiosity. And when we get to the other side, we'll have a lot to discuss. So is there someone who will volunteer to read the story in its entirety?
It's Bava. That's where I'm
Bava
at.
Mitzia, yeah.
We learned in a Mishnah, if one cut an earthenware oven widthwise into segments and place sand between each and every segment, Rabbi Eliezer deems it ritually pure. Because of the sand, its legal status is not that of a complete vessel, and therefore it is not susceptible to ritual impurity. And the rabbis deem it ritually impure, as it is functionally a complete oven. And this is known as the Oven of Achnai.
Okay, so we're going to pause there for a moment. Just to recap what we have, the case that's set before us. We have an earthenware oven. You could think of it as a clay pot that has been cut into segments, and between each segment, there's sand separating it from the other segments. And so Rabbi Eliezer says, because the sand is there, it's actually not a complete vessel. And so its status being incomplete means it is not susceptible to being ritually pure or impure. It's not a ritual object because it's not yet complete. Whereas the other rabbis disagree. They say it is a complete vessel, but the sand makes it impure. Okay, would you continue, please?
The Gemara asks, what is the relevance of Achnai, a snake, in this context? Rav Yehuda said that Shmuel said it is characterized in that manner due to the fact that the rabbis surrounded it with their statements like this snake, which often forms a coil when at rest, and deemed it impure.
Okay, so to summarize that sentence, the vessel in this case is called achnai because the rabbis were talking about it so much that their statements formed a coil around, a metaphorical coil around this vessel, in the same way that when this kind of snake is at rest, it is similarly in a coil.
The sages taught on that day when they discussed this matter. Rabbi Eliezer answered all possible answers in the world to support his opinion, but the rabbis did not accept his explanations from him. After failing to convince the rabbis logically, Rabbi Eliezer said to them, "If the halacha is in accordance with my opinion, this carob tree will prove it." The carob tree was uprooted from its place 100 cubits, and some say 400 cubits. The rabbis said to him, "One does not cite halachic proof from the carob tree." Rabbi Eliezer then said to them, "If the halacha is in accordance with my opinion, the stream will prove it." The water in the stream turned backward and began flowing in the opposite direction. They said to him, "One does not cite halachic proof from a stream." Rabbi Eliezer then said to them, "If the halacha is in accordance with my opinion, the walls of the study hall will prove it." The walls of the study hall leaned inward and began to fall. Rabbi Yehoshua scolded the walls and said to them, "If Torah scholars are contending with each other in matters of halacha, what is the nature of your involvement in this dispute?"
So we have a number of instances of Rabbi Eliezer asking God to perform miracles on his behalf to prove his point. Each time those miracles do come to be, as he said that they will, and it still doesn't change the rabbis' the collective opinion, because those are not the sources from which we derive our law.
The Gemara relates, the walls did not fall because of the deference due Rabbi Yehoshua, but they did not straighten because of the deference due Rabbi Eliezer, and they still remain leaning. Rabbi Eliezer then said to them, "If the halacha is in accordance with my opinion, heaven will prove it." A divine voice emerged from heaven and said, "Why are you differing with Rabbi Eliezer, as the halacha is in accordance with his opinion in every place that he expresses an opinion?" Rabbi Yehoshua stood on his feet and said, "It is written, it is not in heaven." Deuteronomy 30:12. The Gemara asks, what is the relevance of the phrase, "It is not in heaven" in this context? Rabbi Yirmeiah says, since the Torah was already given at Mount Sinai, we do not regard a divine voice, as you already wrote at Mount Sinai in the Torah, after a majority to incline. Exodus 23:2. Since the majority of rabbis disagreed with Rabbi Eliezer's opinion, the halacha is not ruled in accordance with his opinion.
Thank you so much. That was a beautiful reading. And I wrote some questions down. I'm actually going to go in a slightly different direction. So we hear in this final paragraph that the halacha is actually not decided in heaven, because when God revealed the Torah to us, the people of Israel, at Mount Sinai, it became ours. And so I read this last paragraph as a demand of all of us to interpret the Torah, to interpret its meanings, and to make it meaningful for us, even if there are other authorities who may disagree. And so my question to you now is, do you have an example of this being true in your life, that despite disagreement, whether in your family or in your Jewish community, that you found meaning, that you found purpose in an element of Jewish life, which goes back to, remind me of your name? Ruth. To Ruth's story of her rebelling by returning to going to synagogue. How have you made meaning of what was passed down to you instead and forged your own way in what was given to you, instead of accepting it as it was necessarily?
Well, in a sense, we're all incomplete vessels striving to put things together so that we can find our way. And that's, life is a journey, and that's what we're here to do.
Absolutely.
Slightly different observation. What I like about this story is that even though in the end Eliezer is not the one who gets the halakha in his favor, his opinion is preserved. And I mean, we're used to reading stories about Hillel and Shammai, and usually Hillel is the victor in their arguments, but we hear about Shammai. And so I think that the fact that we are taught through all of these examples to hear both sides of an argument, to not just read the winning opinions.
Yeah, that's a beautiful element of our tradition, and one that isn't necessarily universal. Any other takeaways from this story? Any resonances? Did anything about the story surprise you? And does the connection to the verses of Torah we started with, is that clear? Okay.
I mean, I think that when you have that kind of an authority, like they had in those days, then you lose some of your own personal abilities to reinterpret and how you act.
Like you're bound by the institution?
You're bound by the institution. On the one hand, that sort of makes some things clear to you, and there are times in which I wish there was a Sanhedrin or something like that to perhaps, help things along. But the way it's written, you are bound at the end. You do lose some of your, if you're not, those who are looking at that majority, then they sort of have the power to make those interpretations. It doesn't really give you the power to be Eliezer and to follow him.
Okay, yeah, so having minority opinions preserved is not an invitation to be to start a faction, is it? Okay.
I think I see it a little differently from Judy, in that, like, I understand it in its context to be rather a statement about sort of the democratic nature of interpretation, right? So, like, even if it's authoritative, the process through which it is authoritative is more or less democratic, at least for its time, right? I mean, one could become a rabbi and then participate in the shaping. I mean, obviously, like, many people were cut off from that path, but theoretically, a person could become a rabbi and participate in the shaping of that conversation in a way that, if we're just saying, like, whatever it is from on high, like, is authoritative on its own, that eliminates all room for any kind of personal agency. So this, to me, says rather, like, yes, there are systems, yes, there are authoritative ones, but they're in the hands of people rather than in the hands of God or perhaps, a sovereign, a king. Totally. Yeah.
So with that, we'll segue to our final reading of the morning, which is a poem from one of my favorite Jewish poets, Marge Piercy. And she expands on Deuteronomy 30:14, which is that last verse, no, the thing is very close to you, in your mouth and in your heart to observe it. So I would invite somebody to read that poem for us, and that will close us out. Okay. Thank you, Ruth.
Thank you. Sometimes while I am chanting, Marge Piercy, sometimes while I am chanting, the Hebrew words become liquid as warm rain and I slip through them as if they were water parting to let me down to a clear place. Sometimes when I am praying, the words stop and the darkness rises like water in a basin, and I come into silence, rich as the heart of a rose. Sometimes when I meditate, light swells among my limbs and opens sweet as apple, blossoms from the hard wood of my knobby spine. Light slides behind my eyes, light rises in my throat, light pulses in my chest. There is no I, only you, only light, burning and unburnt. Beautiful.
And so as we turn towards Rosh Hashanah, the new year, I invite you to find the ways that engaging with our tradition and with the words of our tradition can land on your heart and in your mouth in a way that is both comforting and energizing, in a way that is powerful and also comforting.
Thank you.
We're going to start to close out our service now by turning to Aleinu. Which is on page 134, and I'm going to invite everyone to rise.
Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon hakol, l'tet gedula leotzer breshit, shehu noteh shamayim ve'osed haaretz, u'moshev yikaro b'shamayim ima'al, u'shchinatu zo begovhe meromim, hu Eloheinu einod. ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו אחד.
You may all be seated. We're going to turn now to Kaddish Yatom, our mourner's Kaddish. Usually Ruth shares a poem with us at this time, but you just read that poem so beautifully, so thank you. Our Kaddish is found on page 138, but before we get to that, I'm curious if there's anyone here today in a period of mourning. If you're here in the first 7 days, you can stand up and share the name of who you're remembering. If you're here in the first 30 days of mourning, you can stand up and share who you're remembering. Or if you're here in the first year of mourning, you can stand up. Yeah. Or if you're here observing a yard site, you can stand now and share who you are remembering. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And we rise now as one community because there are far too many who do not have anyone to say Kaddish for them. Page 138, we recite together. Yit gadal v'yit kadash shemei rabbah. Be'almad zivrach ruteh ve'amlich malchuteh. B'chayachon u'vyomechon u'v'chaye dechol beit Yisrael. Ba'agala v'zman kariv imru amen. Yehei shmei rabbah mevorach le'olam u'lamei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnatsei. V'yatadar, v'yatale, v'yatalal, shmei de kodesha b'rechu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nehemata, damiran be'alma v'imru, amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shamaya, v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, v'imru, amen. Osei shalom b'mromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, v'imru, amen.
Amen.
Zikronam livracha, may all of their memories be for a blessing.
You may be seated. The only announcements I would say is join us tonight, 6:15, for Slichot. We are partnering with Stephen Wise Synagogue and Wilshire Boulevard. Should be a really restorative, renewed, meditative evening. Learning, everything is combined. There's so 6:15 food. My dancer is ready, I know. Although I was going to do Osei Shalom. Can you dance to Osei Shalom? Do I need to do Vishamru? Okay. Okay. So 6:15 tonight for food, 7 o'clock. It's not dinner, it's heavy hors d'oeuvres, or it's like cheese and wine and that kind of stuff. Charcuterie. No, it should be nice though. And then 7 o'clock service here. We are hosting this year, so I keep reminding people show up. We've good RSVPs and just yeah. And tomorrow we're going to the Nova exhibit at noon.
So we already purchased our ticket block, but our appointment is at 12 p.m. If you would like to come, you can purchase a ticket on your own on the website and then show up to join us at 12 p.m.
And Erev Rosh Hashanah is Wednesday night, 7:30 p.m. And for this crowd, Wednesday morning, we have an 8:30 option or an 11:30 a.m. option. Pretty much very similar services, just the 8:30 service has the professional octet and the intergenerational choir, and the second adult service has just the professional octet. Then we go to the beach for Tashlich, contemplative, Rabbi Aaron's contemplative meditation at 4, beach at 5. Yeah. We will have Shabbat Shuvah next Friday, Saturday. Just of special note is that October 7th, we are having a vigil here at, we opted not to do the citywide one because many of you guys were at our beautiful vigil that we did like October 8th, 9th, like 10th last year, and the feeling was so close, and we really want everyone in our community to have a space to hold for the 1-year anniversary of October 7th. So that'll be on the Monday night between the high holidays here at Temple Emanuel. It's just us. It's, yeah. All right. Is there anything else? By the way, we're still offering babysitting. So far, we get Alyssa, who's being babysat for about 20 minutes. But spread the word, because we're committed to continuing to do it for a while, because if you build it, it'll grow. We're trying, our ECC parents request it, and then, I don't know, they realize Saturday morning, they don't want to wake up. I'm not sure. Pictures of animals? Perfect.
Cute.
Alyssa, are you ready? Veshamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, lasot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam beri olam. Veshamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, lasot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam beri olam. more juice in the back? I think we have do we have a round? No, that's
No.
Okay. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem min haaretz b'tei avon.
Shabbat shalom, everyone.